Incoming President Donald Trump seems on the brink of inking a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Could be Nobel Peace Prize worthy, according to Professor Robert Goldston, astrophysicist at Princeton University, who earlier this week had a really provocative and fascinating column over at Fox News called, we can put this element up on the screen here, called How Donald Trump Can Make History and Win 3 Nobel Peace Prizes. And now, to be clear, Professor Goldston was not saying that simply getting a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel would make him eligible for that Peace Prize. There's more that he would have to do on that. But I think it's interesting to walk through the 3 different Nobel Peace Prizes that you believe he could actually legitimately be in line for because of the historical conditions in which he's coming into office, and also the through line between all 3 of them. So let's start with the one in the Mideast, since that's the one that approximately is going on right now. Were you surprised that he was able to get this breakthrough over the last couple of days? And then what steps have to happen after this to make it enduring enough for the Nobel Committee to say, you know what, this guy, who they probably all despise, just from a cultural perspective, deserves a Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, so all indications are that President-elect Trump, I guess we should say in this context, put some pressure on Netanyahu to agree to some of the last bits of this deal. And, his, I think, general philosophy is peace through strength. And, his claim that all hell will pay seems to have, so to speak, paid off. But there's 2 more stages in this deal that's going to have to be gone through. Well, let's hope by the time this is broadcast, the first stage has been signed off. So there's more to be done. And then ultimately, the real big issue is the situation in Iran. Mm-hmm. That Iran is right on the brink of nuclear weapons. So we need a new comprehensive deal that pulls Iran back from the brink, which we think we could do. I think we could do if we make an arrangement with them where they can make enriched uranium for their reactors, but they never go above, say, 4 or 5% enrichment, so it's just not usable for a bomb. That puts them in a situation where they get what they've explicitly said they wanted, and they don't get what they had said they don't want, which is a bomb. We can put verification measures in. I've actually done some of the research on this, but me and many others. But you can put verification measures in place to be sure that they're just making uranium for their reactors. Then you say, what's the deal on the other side? And it's clear that if we're going to move forward these Abraham Accords, we need to have a plan for a demilitarized Palestinian state. But that has to go through stages, and that has to get strong verification, strong controls that it stays demilitarized. And that would be a deal that would settle the Middle East. You wouldn't have the threat of the Iranian nuclear weapons, and you wouldn't have this continuous problem. Hamas, wanted to take over all of Israel, and some of the right-wingers in Israel would like to expel the Arabs. And so, nobody's going to get everything they want. But we could have a situation where maybe even Iran joins the Abraham Accords. And this, I think, gets President Trump a Nobel Prize.
And before you go to that, just want to be clear to the audience that you're just kind of not like just a random scientist putting out political ideas. Like, your entire career has been in the field of kind of nuclear policy and nuclear proliferation. And so like you were saying, you've done a lot of the research on how it is now possible for countries to verify in a serious way, whether other countries are living up to the deals that they strike, without also then giving away nuclear information back to their adversaries. And that is a through line for all three of these, but go ahead, you were saying.
Well, Professor, yeah, just in the last 24 hours, we have actually an interview with the president of Iran and Lester Holt on NBC Nightly News. We have a clip of that we want to roll now. Let's go ahead and play this.
One potential threat to diplomacy could be seen as what the U.S. believes was Iran's plan to assassinate Donald Trump. Was there such a plan?
All the assassinations and acts of terror that we see happening in Europe and elsewhere, can we see the footsteps of Iranian nationals or other foreign nationals? Have there been any links between those terrorist assassinations and Iran? Iran has never been in pursuit of assassination and acts of terror.
You're saying there was never an Iranian plot to kill Donald Trump?
Never, by no means.
Are you willing to promise that there will be no attempt on the life of Donald Trump?
Ever since the beginning, we never intended to do that.
Okay, so
Not the most persuasive.
yes, he promised to Lester Holt. So, Professor, it's obviously.
I won't promise I have technology, or we in the United States have technology to assure that they won't do that.
Right. So it would be enormously provocative for him to go on NBC Nightly News and just say, hell yeah, we want to kill the guy. That would be absurd and never happen. On the other hand, Donald Trump doesn't want to look like he's making a deal with people who want to kill him. And when I think about the way Donald Trump approaches some of this, even just seeing how the ceasefire negotiations are transpiring right now, he doesn't want to be humiliated. He doesn't want America to be humiliated. He doesn't want to be personally humiliated. Could you talk to us just a little bit about even the psychology or the politics of a negotiation with Donald Trump, whether it's Iran or Israel, Gaza, on these three potential Nobel Peace Prizes, which we also psychologically know would be very appealing to him indeed. What is the leverage if you're Iran? What is the leverage if you're on the other side of the table from Donald Trump in any of these three scenarios?
Well, I think right now Iran is at a low point in its strength and in its influence in that area. With what happened with Hezbollah, what happened with Hamas, what will probably eventually happen with the Houthis. The Iranians are facing a situation where they are weak. And Donald Trump has an air force that can destroy their nuclear program. That's my sense, is that Donald Trump likes to negotiate from strength, and he likes to actually, in a way, not make clear what he's doing, which is an interesting approach and seems to have worked, right? At least hopefully seems to have worked with the Israelis and Hamas. So I think it puts him in a not bad position to say, here's a deal that gets you what you want and prevents you from getting a bomb, which you said you don't want. And if you don't take it, they'll be hell to pay.
And so let's go to this. Let's go to the second one then. And which one would you call a second? Europe or the comprehensive deal? I'd say Europe is kind of makes the most sense to talk about next.
Yeah, I think so. Then we go to the biggest picture.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So where do you see the possibility of a Nobel Peace Prize in Europe and Ukraine?
Well, obviously, there's been horrible death going on in Ukraine, actually on both sides, and it's crazy. Where it comes from ultimately is that if Ukraine were to join NATO, and NATO were to station missiles in Ukraine, then there'd be a situation where Ukraine, or NATO from Ukraine, could mount a decapitating, they call it, nuclear strike on Moscow and just take out Moscow's leadership with a missile that would take less than 10 minutes to arrive. So,
and do they not have that? Does NATO not have that capacity currently?
Well, it's an interesting story, but yes, at this point we do not. It's got to be a much longer distance attack, so that there is a chance for decision making in Moscow, for people to get into a protected position, stuff like that. So that currently we don't have that decapitating strike, that very quick decapitating strike capability. But if nuclear missiles got located in Ukraine, then that would be a big problem. I mean, that was the sort of, there was a whole lot of dressing around this. Ukraine has historical ties to Russia and so forth and so on. But the strategic issue was really the expansion of NATO. And the problem with the expansion of NATO, if they can put missiles in Europe, is this decapitating strike. And there isn't an equivalent thing that Russia can do to us, right? So there's no balance there. So the smart thing to do at this point, in my opinion, is to make a deal where there are no U.S. or Russian missiles anywhere between Iceland on the one hand and the Ural Mountains, which are far to the east of Moscow. So that if there are no nuclear weapons in that area, you lose the whole hair trigger situation of sudden strikes, and you also lose this problem of Ukraine. Now, the problem in Ukraine loses its strategic salience, and you've got a possibility, again, I think, probably arguing from a position of strength. I sense that Donald Trump doesn't like to say, I'll put NATO troops into Ukraine, be specific, but there's a situation on the battlefield that maybe a deal could be made, but it needs that broader context.
Right. And so then the third Nobel Peace Prize you talked about is something that you don't hear talked about in the news, which is a more global nuclear treaty between the three major nuclear powers, China, Russia, and the United States. Can you talk a little bit about the technical innovations that have led us to a place where some of the previous agreements are either obsolete or actually dangerous at this moment?
Well, yeah, sure. What's happened is that we are pushing forward with missile defenses that mostly scientists think can't really stop an attack from Russia or China. We have 44 missiles, and they have hundreds and hundreds of missiles. So there's no way that we can stop even a large fraction of them, even with a miraculously good missile defense. But we do need those missile defenses to be sure that if a rogue state like North Korea or, God forbid, Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that they can't attack us. So we need to make an arrangement where we can verifiably show that we have a certain number of launchers that can take out ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, so that you don't need these crazy responses that the Russians and the Chinese are coming up with. The Russians are coming up with nuclear-powered cruise missiles that can go around over the South Pole and attack us, and with this gigantic torpedo that can run across the ocean and destroy a city like Washington. So you need to make
just on that point. So we would not be able to detect it underwater. Is that the? Well,
that's the sort of question. If I answered it, you'd have to shoot me, or I'd have to shoot myself or something. Maybe we don't want to.
But that's the idea.
Well, no, the idea would be that they have submarines. These are very big torpedoes, and there would have to be an inspection protocol, just the way there'd have to be an inspection protocol to show that we didn't have too many launchers. And in that situation, you can get to a point where you could start bringing down some of the things that are already there. We currently have about 400 missiles on hair trigger alert in silos that you can find on Google Maps, and that the Russians obviously can find on Google Maps. The Chinese are now building up a similar capability. The Russians have about the same capability, and these are just crazy items because you have very little time to decide to use them. And then you also worry that if a significant part of your arsenal is vulnerable, then you're more worried about a first strike, and the Chinese could be more worried about a first strike, and so then that puts everything right on a hair trigger. And these are these aren't war fighting things. You're going to have to use them as soon as a war starts, otherwise they'll get destroyed. So there's a deal that could be made that pretty quickly that would bring down about 400 warheads from both sides. And then it's an interesting thing. If you have three countries competing, and I think it's a good idea for us to try to decouple Russia and Moscow, Russia and China as best we can. Mm-hmm. Then you have a situation where if I take away one warhead, and the deal is that each of China and Russia takes away a warhead, that's a pretty good deal. I've got two less facing me for one that I've got less that I've shot off. So I think there's a possibility, if you really work on it, and if you look at the sort of root cause problem of these missile defenses that they worry might work and we worry won't work, there's a way to get down to much lower numbers with both sides.
And let's talk about China, because Ryan and I were just discussing, how we could look back 100 years from now, and as gross as the conflict of interest between Elon Musk, Tesla, and the Chinese government looks right now, and could bear some really toxic fruit, it's possible that you look back 100 years from now and say this was a huge contributor to diffusing tensions and spared conflict, and was helpful in negotiating with the Chinese government. So talk a little bit about why you see this as an especially ripe moment when it comes to China as well.
Well, I think the story is China is just now doing a build-up. If we don't do a build-up, it'll save us about $1 trillion, which is a noticeable amount of money and part of Donald Trump's goals. And it would also save them a lot of money.
Did you hear that, Elon Musk? $1 trillion.
Here it is.
Well, you can go after Medicaid all you want. You're not going to find $1 trillion. Go ahead.
So if you can cut back this huge expansion, in particular these missiles I was telling you about, we're planning on renewing all of them, or basically replacing all of them, and their control structures and everything. If you could back down on that stuff, it would reduce the tensions with China. Now, I think you have to be worried about Taiwan, of course, so you need to have ships that can help defend Taiwan. But you could put this back on the track that we were on before. It seems to me a lot of the inflation we've had is because we're not getting these cheap things from China. So there's a complicated situation there that could be diffused, I think. One thing we have to recognize is their economy is about the same size as ours. And so sort of trying to make them be a second-class player is not practical.
It's interesting. One of the reasons that is taken as kind of the conventional wisdom for why the Soviet Union imploded was that they tried to keep up this arms race with us, and because we had a bigger and faster growing economy, they increasingly ate into their domestic capacity to grow their economy and distribute the goodies to the Soviet people, and helped lead to collapse. If the Chinese economy is growing significantly faster than ours, and we are spending $1 trillion+ building things that we hope we're never going to use, that at best building things that we never use, at worst building things that we use and destroy ourselves. So just siphoning money out of the economy and it going to nothing other than boosting kind of Northern Virginia real estate prices. Do we face some of the same risk as the Soviet Union, that in this blind competition with China, if they grow faster than us, and we continue to spend $1 trillion on this nuclear capacity, could that end up kind of bankrupting us?
Well, I don't think we're in quite the situation, of course, that Russia was in. People were saying they were spending 8% of their GDP on defense. It was crazy, but of course they weren't spending much more than we.
Right. We're at what? We're at 5%? I don't know. People could Google that. It's a lot though, right? I mean, if we have a 15, what's our GDP? Something like 15 trillion? We're up to 18 now? Emily's going to Google this.
Fact checking.
Yeah, because
And it's the better, and our defense budget is the better part of $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So
27 trillion.
we're at 27 trillion now. Okay, so 1/30, 3%.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So I mean, we're not in the situation that we have a non-functioning economy, and we've got a population that's a third the size of the other guy. Oh, I guess actually our population is quite a bit lower, but our GDP is way higher than Russia's. So people used to say Russia is spending much more, a fraction of their economy on weapons, but in fact they were they're a much smaller economy. So I don't quite see, maybe if you talk 100 years, it's a different story, but I don't see in the next decade or two that we'll get bankrupted. It's just that the national debt is a big problem, and it's certainly going to hurt us to spend this money.
Q4, by the way, has our GDP at 29 trillion.
Okay, well, there we go. But yeah, I don't mean the next 10 years. China thinks in terms of 50 and 100 years. They're happy to wait us out.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly you want to get this path. You want to get this on a path towards eventually eliminating nuclear weapons. Ronald Reagan even said that. So you want to get to that place, and going up isn't necessarily the right way to get to go to eventually come down.
Yeah, and the last point, and I think the thing that makes your case more plausible, is that you pointed out in your piece, Donald Trump hasn't cared about a whole lot consistently throughout his life, but one of the things he has cared about, curiously, has been nuclear war. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so Reagan, no, I shouldn't say Reagan. It's true of Reagan too, in a way. But Donald Trump has spoken from his first. Apparently, it was a Playboy interview.
Where else?
Yeah, well, they talked about other things too, but he focused on the fact that the nuclear situation is really, really dangerous, and he used the metaphor that it's like being ignorant of the fact that you could get sick, and so you don't even pay any attention to your health, and then you get sick, and you're surprised by it. You shouldn't be in that situation with nuclear weapons, and he has repeated that. It's clear that it's something that is a high priority to him, and is certainly a high priority to the Nobel Committee. So if there's going to have to be some sweet talking to get China to the table, clearly. They have to be brought to the table as an equal because they have the capability to build up to being an equal, and they're sort of on that path, and they have an economy that's like ours, not like Russia's. So I think you need to have a situation where all three of you are kind of sitting on the same side of the table trying to solve this problem that you're all threatening each other. Yeah. That's going to then put you on this path so that out in the long term, frankly, out in the long term, there is a long term, right?
Yeah.
If we use all these weapons, there is no long term. There's no 100 years from now where there's any civilizations to speak of left.
Right. So Israel-Palestine, an Iran deal, and the Ukraine war, and then world peace. I'd give them those Nobels.
There you go.
They may be ashamed that they didn't give Ronald Reagan the Nobel Prize when they gave it to Gorbachev. So maybe they'll pay attention.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah, it'll be like a makeup call.
Yeah.
From the refs. Thank you so much, Professor. This was fascinating. We really appreciate you coming on.
Great. I enjoyed it very much.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.